March 18, 2018, a 91-year-old woman opened the door of her apartment in a senior living complex in Texas. A man was standing on the doorstep. He told her to lie down on the bed. Seconds later, he pressed a pillow against her face. The woman began to suffocate. But just before she lost consciousness, she pressed the emergency button on her medical alert bracelet. That signal saved her life, and it exposed the man who may have been responsible for the murders of more than 20 elderly women. His name was Billy Chemirmir. In 2016, strange deaths began to occur in the Dallas area. Elderly women were dying in their apartments. They were in their 80s, sometimes in their 90s. Each time the scene looked the same. The woman was found in her bedroom. She was lying on the bed. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle. In the report, doctors wrote the same conclusion: natural death. At first, this seemed logical. Elderly people often pass away in their sleep. But 2 years later, investigators would realize something disturbing. Many of these deaths were actually murders, and they all could have been connected to one man. Billy Chemirmir was born on December 8, 1972 in Kenya. Very little is known about his childhood. He grew up in a rural area and later decided to move to the United States. In the early 2000s, he ended up in Texas in the Dallas area. There, he began working ordinary jobs. He worked as a caregiver, sometimes as a driver, sometimes as a home care assistant. These professions gave him access to the homes of elderly people. Over time, he began visiting senior living complexes. These places are usually considered safe, but they have one important characteristic: many residents live alone. And when a person dies at the age of 90, it rarely raises serious suspicion. Investigators would later say that this is exactly what allowed the killer to operate for almost 2 years. One of the first places where the strange deaths began to occur was an upscale senior living complex in Dallas. Its name was Edgemere. In 2016, a 91-year-old woman died there. She was found in her apartment. She was lying on the bed. There were no signs of struggle, no signs of violence. The medical conclusion: natural death. A few weeks later, another woman in the same complex died, then a third. At the time, no one saw any connection between these cases, but later it would become clear that in some apartments jewelry had disappeared. Rings, necklaces, small valuables. Sometimes relatives noticed this, but they did not think much of it. They assumed the items had simply been lost. But investigators would later realize something else. They had been stolen. According to police, it was during this period that Billy Chemirmir began his series of crimes. His method was frighteningly simple. He drove to senior living complexes. Sometimes he pretended to be a maintenance worker. Sometimes he simply walked through an unlocked door. Once he was inside the apartment, the same thing happened every time. He forced the woman to lie down on the bed, then he suffocated her with a pillow. This method left almost no traces, especially when the victim was 90 years old. After that, he took jewelry and money and quietly left. For the next 2 years, similar deaths continued to occur again and again. But the real turning point in this story would happen in 2018. As mentioned at the very beginning, 91-year-old Mary Bartle survived. Before losing consciousness, she managed to press the emergency button on her medical bracelet. That signal alerted the staff of the complex. Frightened, the attacker grabbed her jewelry and ran away, and it was her testimony that first gave police a description of the attacker: a tall man, a calm voice. And this detail would soon lead investigators to a man who, at that moment, could already have been responsible for dozens of deaths. After the attack on Mary Bartle, police began an investigation. The woman was able to describe the attacker. She told detectives that it was a tall man. He spoke calmly, and he acted confidently. But the police had very few leads. No one knew his name. However, an unexpected witness soon appeared in the investigation. One of the residents of the senior living complex told detectives that a few days before the attack, he had noticed a suspicious man in the parking lot. The man was sitting in a car and watching the building. It seemed suspicious. So the resident wrote down the license plate number. Police checked the number. The car turned out to be a Nissan Altima, and it was registered to a man named Billy Chemirmir. Investigators began looking into him. He lived in a suburb of Dallas. He worked as a caregiver and sometimes as a driver, but the police decided to place him under surveillance. A few days later, something happened that dramatically changed the entire investigation. Officers were watching Chemirmir near his home. They saw him walk toward a dumpster. In his hands was a small red wooden box. He threw it into the trash. Detectives decided to check it. When they pulled the box out of the dumpster and opened it, they found jewelry inside: rings, necklaces, and documents. The documents belonged to a woman named Lucy Harris. She was 81 years old. Investigators immediately went to her address. When police arrived at her home, they knocked on the door. There was no answer. After some time, they decided to go inside. Lucy Harris was lying on the bed. She was dead. Later, experts determined the cause of death. The woman had been suffocated. The method of the murder was the same one described by Mary Bartell: a pillow. At that moment, detectives began to realize that this was not an ordinary case. They might be dealing with a serial killer. On March 20th, 2018, police arrested Billy Chemirmir. During the arrest, officers found jewelry in his possession. But the real discovery came later. When police searched his apartment, they found dozens of pieces of jewelry: rings, necklaces, watches. Each of these items belonged to an elderly woman, and many of those women were already dead. The story that began as an attack on one elderly woman was now turning into the investigation of a series of murders. After Billy Chemirmir was arrested, police began reviewing old cases. At first, detectives focused on the jewelry found in his apartment. Each piece had to be matched to its rightful owner. Investigators began contacting the families of elderly women who had died over the past few years. Gradually, a disturbing pattern began to appear. Some of the jewelry belonged to women whose deaths had previously been ruled natural. Many of these women had lived in the same senior living complexes, and almost all of them had been found dead in their beds. No signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle. At that point, investigators began to suspect that the number of victims could be much higher. One of the complexes where several of these deaths occurred was Edgemere. It was there that a 92-year-old woman named Doris Gleason died. When she was found dead in October 2016, doctors said the cause of death was natural, but her daughter Shannon Dion noticed something strange. Her mother's necklace was missing from the apartment. It was a piece of jewelry that Doris almost never took off. At first, the family assumed the necklace had simply been lost, but after some time, Shannon began to notice a troubling pattern. Other elderly women in the same complex had also died, and in some of those cases, jewelry had disappeared as well. Shannon began her own investigation. She studied police reports and spoke with other families. Later, she would tell journalists that this was the moment she first suspected that something far more disturbing might be happening inside the complex. But at the time, police had not yet connected these cases. Only after Chemirmir's arrest did investigators begin putting the pieces together, and the list of possible victims began to grow quickly. First 5, then 10, then more. Eventually, police would say that Chemirmir might be connected to at least 22 murders of elderly women. Some of the victims were over 90 years old. The oldest was more than 100, but there were also survivors. Two women survived their attacks, and it was their testimonies that helped detectives understand how the killer operated. The first trial began in 2021. Prosecutors charged Chemirmir with the murder of Luthi Harris. She was the first victim whose death investigators were able to prove. During the trial, prosecutors presented evidence, jewelry found in his home, witness testimonies, and the statements of surviving victims. But something unexpected happened. The jury could not reach a unanimous decision. One juror refused to find him guilty. As a result, the court declared a mistrial, but prosecutors decided to hold a new trial. In 2022, the second trial began. This time, the jury found Chemirmir guilty. He was convicted of the murder of Luthi Harris. Later, he was also convicted of the murder of Mary Brooks. He received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. After that, prosecutors decided not to hold additional trials for the remaining cases. The families of the victims agreed with this decision. For many of them, knowing the truth was more important than going through more court proceedings. On September 19, 2023, something unexpected happened. Billy Chemirmir was found dead in prison. He was killed by his cellmate. The inmate attacked him inside the cell and strangled him. Guards found Chemirmir already unconscious. He was 50 years old. This is how the story of the serial killer ended, in prison. But many questions remain unanswered. Investigators believe he may have been responsible for the deaths of more than 20 women. However, only a few of those cases were proven in court. The most disturbing part of this story is that many of those deaths had been considered natural for years, and if one woman had not pressed the emergency button, the serial killer might have continued killing for much longer. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us how easily the truth can stay hidden for years, and sometimes one small moment, one person speaking up, is enough to reveal something no one expected. If you're interested in real stories like this one, cases that shocked investigators and changed people's lives, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories we're going to uncover together.